The notification buzzed in just as I finalized the merger paperwork for a massive tech acquisition. It was late afternoon on December 22nd, and the golden lights of downtown Chicago sparkled across the icy skyline beyond my office windows. I reached for my phone, absent-mindedly expecting an update from legal, but instead saw a message from my mother. Claire, sweetheart, about Christmas this year. With your brother Ethan bringing his new fiancée, Savannah, she's on television. You know we think it might be best if you sat this one out. Hope you understand. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen for a long second, then let out a soft breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. My lips curled into a wry smile, tight and a little bitter. So nothing had changed. 15 years, and they still viewed me as the one who didn't quite belong. Despite everything I'd built, despite every success, I was still the odd note in their carefully composed family portrait. What my mother didn't realize, what none of them did, was that the overlooked freelancer they had barely acknowledged at family gatherings was now Claire Maddox, CEO of Vanguard Edge Consulting, a firm quietly shaping multi-billion-dollar strategies across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The same firm they were now desperately trying to partner with. Tasha, I said as the intercom buzzed gently. The team from Crane Point Industries is ready for the call, my assistant replied with her usual crisp professionalism. Thanks, Tasha, I said, smoothing the sleeves of my slate blue silk blouse and straightening in my chair. Even now, I knew they all thought I was still scraping by, shopping at consignment stores and living in a studio apartment. I let them think it. Let them picture the underdog they'd cast aside. 15 years ago, I walked away from the Maddox farmhouse in rural Minnesota after refusing the golden offer to join Maddox & Sons Group, the family's pride and legacy. You're being selfish, my father had shouted at me, his face red with rage. You think you know more than all of us combined. Ethan, slouched in a tufted leather chair, had let out a smug chuckle. Let her go. She'll come crawling back. I never did. I landed in Chicago with nothing but an old laptop, a shaky business plan, and enough drive to light up the city. I worked 70-hour weeks, slept in shared apartments, risked everything I had, and in the end, I built something extraordinary. Vanguard Edge now held discrete minority stakes in almost half the companies my family's firm routinely dealt with. There was a polite knock on the glass door of my office. Tasha stepped in, holding a sleek navy folder embossed in gold. The contract from Maddox & Sons, she said, her tone unreadable. It's ready for your signature. I accepted the folder and flipped it open. My father's signature gleamed in black ink across the bottom margin. My fingers paused over the pen beside me, but I smiled instead, slow and deliberate. Actually, Tasha, I said, setting the folder back on my desk, cancel it. She blinked. Excuse me. Merry Christmas, I said softly, the irony coating my words like the first frost of winter. For 6 months, Maddox & Sons had been quietly but frantically pursuing a partnership with Vanguard Edge, not realizing the firm they were wooing was run by the daughter they'd left behind. The deal was critical for them more than they knew. I glanced again at the text from my mother. We need to maintain a certain image. That phrase echoed in my head, cold and clinical. A new email chimed. Ethan, of course. Claire, Mom mentioned Christmas. Don't overthink it. You know how she gets about appearances. And Savannah's job is really public. It's just easier this way. Maybe once you're more established, things can go back to normal. More established. I stared at the high 7-figure contract, waiting for my approval, the very agreement that could open Maddox & Sons to lucrative international markets. I knew, thanks to our internal intel, how much my father had been bragging about this deal to his board. And yet to them, I was still someone they could brush aside in favor of social optics. Tasha returned this time with an iPad. Your father's on Zoom. He wants to confirm tomorrow's contract ceremony. I nodded and tapped into the call. Claire Maddox speaking, I said, my tone brisk and professional. In business, I always used my mother's maiden name to keep my identity separate. It made me a ghost to them, a powerful, untraceable ghost. Hey there, Claire, my father said, putting on his best business smile, his voice artificially upbeat. A far cry from the man who once dismissed my dreams as naive. Just checking, we're all set for tomorrow, right? This deal is huge for us. I thought about the countless Christmas dinners I'd been invisible at, the congratulatory parties thrown for Ethan, the years I'd been seen as the family failure. Actually, Mr. Maddox, I said coolly, I've been reviewing the terms. I have a few concerns. He blinked, confused, but everything was already agreed upon. Things change, I replied, keeping my tone light. We should go over them in person. Make sure everyone's aligned. Sure, he said quickly. You mean me and the board? No, I said firmly. Bring everyone, your whole family. Maddox and Sons is a family company, right? A pause. Then quietly, well, Claire's not really involved. All your children, I said again. Understood. Understood. I ended the call and leaned back, fingers tapping thoughtfully on the embossed leather folder. Tomorrow would be one for the books. From across the office, Tasha looked up from her tablet. Should I prep the executive conference room for the ceremony? Yes, I said, my voice like steel wrapped in velvet. And make sure the media team is ready. I want every single reaction documented. That night, I stayed long past sunset, orchestrating every detail. This wasn't just about contracts or numbers. This was a reckoning. A moment that would redefine every relationship tied to my last name. Christmas, I realized, would never be the same again. By 6 a.m., I was already at the office. The 47th floor conference room sparkled under warm lighting, the polished walnut table gleaming beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ice-dusted lake. Fresh orchids lined the windowsill. Every detail was perfect. Tasha entered unflappable as always. Your family just arrived. Should I bring them up? I checked my reflection. Gone were the cardigans and sensible flats they remembered. I now wore a tailored charcoal Armani suit, sleek black Louboutin heels, and my grandmother's Cartier watch, the last gift she'd ever given me. Let them wait, I said, adjusting my jacket. I'll make my entrance. 20 minutes later, I stood alone in the mirrored silence of my private elevator, watching the illuminated floor numbers descend in a slow, inevitable rhythm. My breath steady but shallow, fogged faintly against the brushed steel walls, the only witness to the tension building quietly in my chest. Then came the buzz, sharp and clinical. Another message from Judith Maddox, my ever image-conscious mother. Claire, where are you? Your father says this meeting is critical. Don't embarrass us. I read it twice, feeling the familiar tightening in my throat, not from sadness, but the residual ache of having once longed for their approval. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket with a cool smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Oh, Judith, if only you knew what kind of embarrassment you were about to orchestrate all by yourself. The elevator doors glided open, and the muted click of my Louboutins echoed down the polished corridor like a drum roll. Beyond the glass panels of the conference room, I saw them waiting, nervous energy clinging to them like mist before a storm. My father, Richard, paced like a general awaiting a battle report. Judith fussed at Ethan's collar, smoothing his tie for the third time, while Savannah, perfect as a magazine spread, rehearsed her smile in the mirror-like window. Around them, the board from Crane Point Industries chatted idly, oblivious to the tempest about to break. I nodded once at Tasha. She understood immediately. With quiet authority, she opened the double doors and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Claire Maddox, CEO of Vanguard Edge Consulting." In that instant, the room turned to glass. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads swiveled. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. And then a delicate chink, the sound of Judith's champagne flute slipping from her fingers and shattering against the walnut conference table. Shards of crystal skittered like startled birds across the surface. My father paled visibly, the color draining from his face like wine spilled on linen. But it was Ethan, always so composed, so sure of his station, who sat frozen speechless, the easy confidence wiped clean from his features like chalk from a board. "Good morning," I said, each syllable clipped and crystalline as I strode to the head of the table. The air was electric, taut with realization. I took my seat slowly like a monarch at court. "Shall we begin?" This is absurd," Richard stammered, his voice scraping the edge of disbelief. You're a freelance consultant." I opened the black folder before me, letting the embossed documents fan outward like a hand of winning cards. "According to these," I said coolly, "I'm the CEO of the firm you've been courting, Vanguard Edge." A senator on the board straightened in his seat, suddenly alert. "I'm sorry," he asked, bewildered. "What exactly is happening?" I turned to Savannah, who sat poised and perfect. "Oh, I would have been properly introduced at Christmas dinner," I said, my tone dipped in sugar. "But I wasn't invited. Something about maintaining appearances, wasn't it?" Judith opened her mouth, reaching for her usual veneer of civility. "Claire, darling, this is all a terrible misunderstanding." "Is it?" I cut in, my voice like a blade honed on years of exclusion. I tapped the sleek control panel in front of me. The wall screen behind me flared to life. "Let's revisit some context, shall we?" The room dimmed slightly as the messages began to appear. First, the Christmas disinvitation from Judith, then Ethan's patronizing note suggesting that maybe once I was more established, things could return to normal. Finally, a voice message of Richard practically begging for this partnership, unaware he was pleading with his own daughter. Silence fell like ash. Tasha moved swiftly, placing the updated contracts at each guest's place. My father flipped his over with trembling fingers. These aren't the same terms. They're not, I confirmed. I've made revisions. Years of revisions. You see, I've had plenty of time to decide how this moment should unfold. Richard leaned forward, desperation clouding his eyes. You can't do this. Maddox and Sons has plans. Investors' expansion. Like how I had plans when I moved to Chicago alone with nothing but vision and stubbornness, I said, rising to my feet. Like the dreams I chased while being dismissed at every holiday table. Judith's face pinched. We were trying to protect you from failure. No, I said, my voice echoing against the glass walls. You were trying to protect your image. I turned toward the towering skyline, a mosaic of frost and firelight stretching across the horizon. Well, congratulations. The world's about to learn exactly who the Maddox family really is. I adjusted the cuff of my blazer with deliberate precision, then looked back at the table. The partnership is off. Vanguard Edge will acquire Crane Point directly. And as you've likely realized by now, Richard, that move cuts Maddox and Sons out of the European market entirely. The blow landed hard. My father sagged into his chair, the full weight of the consequences settling into his bones. You can't do this, he murmured. We're family. I paused in the doorway, then turned slowly. Family, I echoed, voice a whisper laced with fire. Funny because just yesterday I was told I wasn't successful enough to be included. Tell me, will I finally be welcome at Christmas dinner? And with that I walked out. Behind me the silence roared. Through the glass I glimpsed Judith dabbing her face with a silk handkerchief. Richard sat hollow-eyed beside the contract he'd shredded in disbelief. Ethan, polished, prideful Ethan, slumped forward, the architecture of his ambition crumbling like dry plaster. Tasha joined me at a measured pace, her heels in sync with mine. That was intense, she said quietly. Are you okay? I glanced at my phone. Another blinking message from my mother. Claire, please come to dinner. We need to fix this. A faint smile tugged at my lips. Cancel the dinner, I said. I've got better plans. The fallout came swiftly like a winter storm descending without warning. My voicemail overflowed with apologies disguised as ultimatums. Claire, we're still your parents. You're destroying everything. Let's talk just the three of us. I never responded. Vanguard finalized the Crane Point acquisition within days. Meanwhile, Maddox and Sons' stock slipped into a slow, humiliating nosedive. Headlines were unkind: Maddox merger collapse rocks. Legacy firm Vanguard Edge claims AI supply chain crown. A week later, I was back in my office reviewing a new round of acquisition proposals when Tasha entered quietly. Your brother's here, she said. Third time this week, but this time he's alone. I pulled up the security feed. There he stood, Ethan. No tailored smirk, no camera-ready grin. His tie hung loose, his eyes hollow with something unfamiliar. Regret. I studied him for a moment. Then with a steady breath I said, send him up. Mason entered with the wary hesitation of a man stepping into a courtroom rather than an office. His gaze swept across the room. He'd never expected his younger sister to inhabit this space, with its clean lines and glass walls, its commanding view of the frozen cityscape far below. The skyline framed me like a living portrait, and for once he looked small against it. His voice, when it finally came, was low and stripped of bravado. Nice office, he murmured. Bigger than mine at Maddox and Sons. Though I guess that doesn't mean much anymore. I didn't offer him the comfort of a smile. What do you want, Mason? He sank into the visitor chair across from me, the tailored fabric of his blazer wrinkling as he sat, not with his usual choreographed grace, but with the weariness of a man whose image had finally begun to crack. For once I noted silently he's not performing. He looked down at his hands. Savannah called off the wedding. My brow lifted. Really, the picture-perfect political duo couldn't survive a few messy headlines. He gave a short, hollow laugh. She said she can't be linked to a sinking ship, said I no longer fit her image. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Dad's drinking again, he added, voice thinning into confession. The board's in full-blown panic mode. Mom can't show her face at the club. It's all unraveling. I studied him for a moment, my expression unreadable. Because of me, he shook his head slowly. No, because we built everything on appearances, just like my relationship. I let the words settle between us like dust in a shaft of light. You all treated success like it wore a single face, I said quietly, and mine didn't match. You deserved better, he admitted, the admission tearing free from a place I'd never thought he could reach. You deserved a lot more. I inhaled deeply, letting the ache roll through me before speaking. Do you know what it was like, watching you all toast each other's victories, every promotion, every new car, every engagement, and act like I didn't exist? Mom threw galas for every one of your milestones. She never even remembered what I did. He looked stricken. We thought you were struggling. You never asked I snapped standing, not once, in 10 years. Not one question about my business, my people, my plans. You were too busy preserving your narrative to see I'd passed every one of you. Silence thickened. Real tears, raw and unvarnished, filled his eyes. I was awful to you, he said. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at him, steady and unflinching. Forgiveness isn't the issue, Mason. Trust is. And that's something you'll have to earn. The door burst open. Judith and Richard stormed in, undeterred by Tasha's protests from the hallway. Richard's voice came sharp, though its old thunder had dimmed. Claire, this has gone far enough. You've made your point. I turned, expression calm. And what point is that? Judith spoke breathless. That you're successful. That we were wrong. We see you now, darling. Please stop punishing us. I laughed. It was not a kind sound. It was the sound of something cold finally cracking. You think this is about revenge? I asked, walking slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below shimmered like a constellation. You think this was about proving I made it? I turned. No, this is about consequences. About making it unmistakably clear that your choices, your judgment, your condescension, your desperate clinging to image have weight. We're your parents, Richard said, his voice raw now. Everything we did to protect you. I faced him. No. You did it to protect yourselves. Your image. Your narrative. Congratulations. I held up my tablet displaying the latest headlines. That image is now thoroughly dismantled. A crumbling company. A public breakup. A family in shambles. What do you want from us? Mason whispered. What I wanted, I said, voice soft now, sorrow threaded through each syllable, was your belief. When I was building Vanguard. Your respect when I succeeded. To be treated like a daughter. Not like an embarrassment. I paused, the moment weighted with years of buried wounds. But now I don't want anything. Judith began to cry, her tears as familiar as wallpaper. I'd seen them before when I didn't get into their preferred college, when I refused the family firm, when I disrupted their narrative. Please, Claire, she whispered. It's almost Christmas. Ah, yes, I said, with frozen grace. The Christmas dinner I wasn't welcome at. Tell me, does image still matter, or did that fade when the golden boy got dumped? Richard stepped forward, desperate now. Just tell us what you want, board seats, equity, a public statement. We'll give you anything. You still don't get it, I said, voice calm but full of fire. I don't want what you have. Vanguard is worth 10 times what Maddox and Sons ever dreamed of. What I wanted was a family that valued me. Not for what I could do for them, but for who I am. I turned back to my desk and pressed the intercom. Tasha, please escort them out and update the security list. Claire, please, Judith whispered. We can fix this. I didn't turn. No, Mom. You don't fix a decade of dismissal with a single act of desperation. When the door finally clicked shut, I exhaled and stared out at the skyline lights flickering like fireflies across the lake. My phone buzzed. A new message. Heard what happened. Your grandmother would be proud. Christmas dinner's at my place this year. Love, Margaret. For the first time that day, a real smile broke across my face. Yes, this year I'd be exactly where I belonged. The next morning, with a stillness in my chest that felt like peace, I assembled my executive team in the Vanguard Edge boardroom. Our most daring initiative yet was launching a sweeping restructure of the consulting sector, beginning with the acquisition of 3 promising mid-tier firms across the Midwest. Maddox and Sons, I noted silently, wasn't among them. As I outlined our strategy, my thoughts drifted briefly and without bitterness to the family Christmas dinner, likely unfolding in a well-curated dining room back in Minnesota. The gold-rimmed china, the obligatory toasts, the hollow laughter layered over fraying facades. Meanwhile, I was building something real. A week later, Tasha brought in a small package. Inside was my grandmother's worn leather business card holder and a handwritten note from Margaret. She always said you'd outshine them all. Looks like she was right. I placed the case next to the bronze nameplate on my desk, a quiet talisman, a reminder. Success isn't measured by who shows up once you've made it. It's measured by who believed in you when no one else would. My family had worked tirelessly to preserve their image, and now they had one etched in headlines and rumor, just not the one they expected. As for me, I had the one I earned, commanding, respected, complete. Later, someone asked, "Do you ever miss your family?" I looked out at the empire I'd built and said simply, "I have a company to run," because that was worth more than any seat at their table. To anyone who's ever been cast aside, told you weren't enough, or dared to rise anyway, this story is yours. I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did it to prove that quiet, flickering voice inside me had always been right. And if you've ever felt that too, drop a comment, share your journey, or just whisper, "I see you," into the space where belief once lived. Because your story matters. In the end, you don't need their table. Build your own. Shape it with grit, polish it with resolve, and fill it with those who never needed convincing to pull up a chair. And one day they'll wish they had a seat. If this story struck a chord, if you found even a sliver of yourself in these words, like the video, subscribe to the channel and stay for more. Because sometimes hearing someone else's fire helps you tend your own.